The apology showed up on a Tuesday night. Not in my inbox. Not in my messages. On a public post. A clean photo. Soft lighting. Neutral outfit. The kind of image that makes people assume sincerity before they even read the caption. My sister wrote, "I've been reflecting a lot lately. I said and did things that may have hurt someone I love. I'm sorry." No name, no specifics, no real accountability. But it was designed to feel mature, responsible. Brave. The comments flooded in almost immediately. "Proud of you. This takes strength. Family is everything. You're such a good person. People love apologies. They don't have to understand. Because vague apologies don't force anyone to take sides. They give everyone permission to feel good." And that's why she posted it.
Not for me.
For the audience. I stared at the screen for a long moment and felt something I didn't expect. Not anger. Not relief. Recognition. This wasn't a peace offering. It was a strategic move. A calculated reset. She'd tried legal threats. She'd tried spreading rumors. She'd tried going to HR. And when none of that stuck, she shifted to something more dangerous. A public apology that made her look healed, while keeping me trapped as the unforgiving one if I didn't respond the right way. Because that's how people like her win without proof. They don't need to convince everyone you're wrong. They only need to convince everyone they're trying. That night, I didn't comment. I didn't like it. I didn't message her. I took a screenshot and added it to the folder. Public narrative. Episode 15, then I put my phone down and went back to my evening. I cooked. I cleaned. I read a few pages of a book I barely absorbed. The silence felt heavy, not because I felt guilty, but because I knew what comes next after a public apology. The private trap. Sure enough, the next morning, my cousin texted, "Did you see her post? Maybe this is a good time to talk. She's really trying. Really trying." The phrase people repeat when they want you to cooperate with a performance. I didn't respond. An hour later, my aunt, Kale, iletit rin. She left a voicemail that sounded like concern, but carried the same pressure I'd heard all my life. "She's your sister. You only get one family. Don't be stubborn." Stubborn. Another word they use when your boundaries interrupt their comfort. Around noon, my sister finally reached out directly. Not emotional. Not apologetic. Efficient. "Can we meet? Just you and me. No drama." No drama. That phrase means no witnesses. It means no record. It means come back into the private room where I control the temperature. I didn't respond. She sent another message 5 minutes later. "I'm doing this publicly because I don't want people to think we're enemies." There it was. She wasn't apologizing to heal me. She was apologizing to manage perception. To make sure she looked reasonable so that if I refused, she could point and say, "See, I tried." I stared at the message, then opened my incident log. Date, time, text. I kept it clinical, because the more emotional the situation gets, the more important it is to keep your records cold. That evening, she tried the next angle, a softer voice memo. She sounded calm, almost gentle. "I'm tired," she said. "I don't want this anymore. I just want my brother back." The words were nearly perfect, and that's how I knew they weren't spontaneous. She'd rehearsed them. Because genuine remorse doesn't sound polished. It sounds clumsy. It sounds specific. It sounds like, "I did this, and I understand why it was wrong." Not, "I don't want this anymore." As if the conflict was as if it happened to both of us equally. I didn't respond, and the silence forced her to show her real goal. 2 hours later, a third message arrived. Shorter. Sharper. "If we meet, I can clear things up with everyone." Clear things up. So the public apology wasn't the end. It was the setup. She wanted a meeting, Not for closure, but for ammunition. A photo. A handshake. We talked. Proof she could show people. So her next post could say, "We're working on it." And if I didn't give her that moment, she'd paint me as the obstacle. That night, one sentence. The same kind of sentence I'd used in court and at work. If you want to apologize, put it in writing with specifics. No emotion. No attack. Just a standard. A requirement. A boundary dot. Her response came fast. Too fast for someone who was reflecting. I already apologized. There it was. The mask slipping dot to her. An apology wasn't truth. It was a transaction. She'd paid her part publicly and expected me to accept. I didn't. And that's when the real version of her appeared. So you're going to punish me forever. Punish. They always call boundaries punishment, because it makes you sound cruel for protecting yourself. I didn't reply. I let the question hang. Then she tried the final move of block 1. She brought my parents in. A group text. My father wrote, "We saw her apology. She's being the bigger person. Don't ruin this. Bigger person." That phrase is a trap too, because it implies that if you don't participate, you're smaller, immature, petty. I looked at the group thread and felt the old familiar weight of expectation press down, not because I believed it, because I recognized it. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about restoring the old hierarchy, the old version of me, the one who explains, forgives, absorbs. I didn't type back. Instead, I took a screenshot, added it to the file, and wrote one line in my incident log that made the whole episode crystal clear. Public apology used as leverage. Private meeting requested. Presser applied through family. That was the shape of it. That was the pattern. When she couldn't control the narrative by force, she tried to control it by appearing soft. But softness, without specifics, isn't remorse. It's strategy. And I knew what the next move would be. She'd either escalate, or she'd bait me into a private conversation and twist it into proof. Either way, the apology wasn't for me. It was for the crowd. And in a crowd, the quiet person is always the easiest villain to write. Unless the quiet person finally decides to stop being available to the story. The shift happened quietly. No announcement. No confrontation. Just a subtle change in tone from the people around her. At first, it showed up as curiosity. Friends who had commented hearts on her apology started asking questions, not directly to me, but to each other. What actually happened? Why won't he respond? Did he ever say anything back? Silence works like that. When someone performs remorse loudly and the other person refuses to participate, the spotlight slowly turns. And she felt it. That's when the invitation arrived. An email, not a message. An email feels official. Documented. Serious. Subject line. Let's clear the air. She suggested a neutral place, a cafe halfway between our apartments. Public enough to feel safe. Private enough to feel contained. She even added a line meant to sound cooperative. I don't want this to be emotional. Just honest. Honest. I'd learned to treat that word like a warning label, because people who are actually honest don't announce it in advance. Te gustar. I didn't accept right away. Primera. Wa. Aited. Because time reveals intention. Within 20 minutes, she followed up. I've told people I've reached out. I don't want them thinking you ignored me. There it was. The meeting wasn't for closure. It was for optics. She needed proof she could point to. Refused. I replied later that evening. One sentence. If we meet, I'll record the conversation. No accusation. No emotion. Just a condition. Her response came instantly. Why would you do that? I could almost hear the offense in her typing. Because recording changes the power dynamic. It turns feelings into facts. It prevents revision. She tried again. I thought we were past this. Recording feels hostile. Hostile. Another word people use when accountability enters the room. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I simply replied, "Then we don't need to meet." And for the first time since the apology, she stopped texting for 12 hours, which told me everything. The next morning, she changed tactics. A longer message, carefully worded. "I'm not trying to trap you. I just want peace. I don't want to feel like I'm walking on eggshells around my own brother." Peace. Eggshells. Notice how quickly the story flips. Her apology had positioned her as reflective. Now, she was repositioning herself as oppressed by my boundaries. Be my silence. By my refusal to meet privately without a record. That's the pivot point people miss. The moment when reconciliation stops being about repair and starts being about access. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my log. Date. Time. Messages saved. I added one more note. Recording declined. Narrative pressure increasing. That afternoon, she tried something riskier. She sent a voiced memo. Her voice was softer than before. Almost fragile. "I'm scared," she said. "I feel like you're waiting for me to mess up so you can punish me." Punish. Again, it's remarkable how consistently that word shows up when control is denied. She wasn't scared of me. She was scared of the loss of access. Because without a private conversation, she couldn't recalibrate the story. She couldn't say, "We talked." She couldn't paraphrase me. She couldn't extract a sentence and turn it into proof of aggression or forgiveness, whichever suited her next move. That night, I received a message from someone I didn't expect. A mutual friend. Neutral. Level-headed. Not emotionally invested. "Hey, I just wanted to check in." Something feels off. She keeps mentioning how hard she's trying, but can't explain what she's actually apologizing for. There it was. The crack. Public apologies without substance age quickly, especially when paired with relentless follow-ups behind the scenes. I replied to the friend with exactly one sentence. I asked for specifics in writing. I haven't received any. Nothing more. No commentary. No defense. Facts stand better alone. Later that evening, my sister sent one last message that revealed the entire game. "If you don't meet me, I'll have to assume you're doing this on purpose." Doing what? On purpose. Refusing to perform forgiveness. Refusing to provide her with a photo op. Refusing to step back into a role that made her comfortable. I read it. Twice. Then I typed my final response of the day. "You're free to assume whatever you need." And I meant it. Because assumptions are narratives people tell themselves when they don't have evidence. That was the turning point. Not because I said something powerful, but because I stopped trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding. The next morning, her tone changed again. Sharper. "I don't know why you're acting like I'm dangerous." Dangerous. Dangerous. Another escalation word. Notice the pattern. Reflection. Big team accusation. That's the cycle. When the trap fails. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. By then, her public apology had done something she didn't anticipate. It had invited scrutiny. People who once accepted the story at face value were now watching how she handled resistance. And she was handling it badly. Too many messages. Too much pressure. Too much insistence on privacy. The apology had opened the door. Her reaction to boundaries was slamming it shut. That's when I realized something important. I wasn't avoiding a trap. She'd already sprung it on herself. Because in trying to force reconciliation, she revealed the exact thing she was trying to hide. The apology was never about repair. It was about regaining narrative control. And the more she pushed, the more visible that became. By the end of the week, she stopped messaging. Not because she'd healed, but because the silence was no longer mine alone. Others had started to notice, and when a manipulator realizes the audience is paying attention, they either escalate recklessly or disappear to rewrite the story somewhere else. Knew which one she was more likely to choose. The disappearance didn't happen all at once. It started with silence. No more messages from her. No follow-ups. No, just checking in. At first, I thought she was regrouping. People like her rarely retreat without planning their next move. But days passed. Then, a week, and something subtle began to happen in the background. Something she couldn't control. The apology stopped working. Not because people turned against her, but because it stopped making sense. Public apologies rely on momentum. They need reinforcement. They need a response from the other side, positive or negative, to stay alive. Without that, they decay. People moved on. The comments section quieted. The sympathy dried up. The posts slid down timelines. And the questions that remained didn't sound supportive anymore. They sounded confused. Did they ever talk? Is everything actually okay? Why does she keep bringing it up if it's resolved? That's the risk of performative remorse. Once you perform healing, people expect healed behavior. And she wasn't capable of that, because behind the scenes, she was still trying to control outcomes. I found out through someone else. A mutual acquaintance I hadn't spoken to in months reached out. No agenda. No emotional framing, just an observation. She mentioned you again. Said she tried everything and you shut her out. But when I asked what she apologized for, she changed the subject. That was Italiano. The moment the narrative cracked wasn't loud. It was awkward. People don't like inconsistency. They tolerate conflict, but they notice contradiction. She'd apologized publicly, but privately, she demanded access. She'd claimed peace, but reacted aggressively to boundaries. She'd said she wanted healing, but refused specificity. Those things don't add up forever, and once people sense that, they stop engaging. Not because they've chosen sides, but because the story no longer feels clean. I didn't celebrate that shift. I barely noticed it at first. Because quiet revenge isn't about watching someone fall. It's about not holding yourself responsible for keeping them standing. The real moment came later, unexpectedly, at a family gathering I didn't attend. I heard about it secondhand. Apparently, someone asked her casually why we hadn't spoken since her apology. A harmless question, the kind people ask when they assume a story has resolved. She froze. Not visibly, not dramatically, but just long enough for the silence to register. Then she said something vague. Something like, "He's complicated." There it was, the shift from remorse to labeling, from accountability to characterization. And people noticed, because apologies don't coexist well with quiet insults. The next thing I heard was even more telling. She stopped mentioning me entirely. No more post. No more references. No more hints, which is exactly what happens when a tactic stops delivering returns. You don't double down, you abandon it. And that's when I understood something important. The apology wasn't a failure. It was a test to see if I'd re-enter the arena, if I'd meet her privately, if I'd give her a sentence to, quote, if I'd supply the raw material for a new narrative. When I didn't, the entire strategy collapsed, because quiet revenge doesn't give people anything to twist. No reaction, no confrontation, no closure photo, just a blank space where leverage used to be. Weeks later, I received one final message from her. Short, neutral, almost cold. I hope you're doing well. No apology, no request, no emotion. Just an attempt to reset the tone without addressing the past prime rea. De once, then archived it. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was empty. The apology arc was over, not with reconciliation, not with resolution, but with irrelevance. And that's the part people misunderstand. Quiet revenge isn't about making someone regret what they did. It's about removing yourself as a resource for their narrative. Once you do that, they're forced to carry their own contradictions. Alone. That episode taught me something I wish I'd learned earlier. Not every apology is an invitation. Some are traps dressed as growth. Some are meant to restore access, not repair damage. And silence is the only response that doesn't feed them. Because when you stop reacting, explaining, defending, you stop being useful to the story they're trying to tell. They laughed first. I stayed quiet, and this time the quiet didn't just protect me. It ended the conversation permanently.